Week 14 is in the books, so that means it's time to hit those waiver wires to find players that could add value to the back end of your rosters. And yes, actually in fantasy playoffs as well. These guys might be very important for contenders. But first and foremost, I want to highlight a couple of players that are already highly rostered, but not exactly 100% that I think need to be. And that includes Isaac Guerendo, running back for the San Francisco 49ers, Sean Tucker, running back for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Antonio Gibson, running back for the New England Patriots, Mike Williams, wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Marvin Mims, wide receiver for the Denver Broncos, Juwan Johnson, tight end for the New Orleans Saints, and Michael Mayer, tight end for the Vegas Raiders. Again, all of these guys are rostered in well over 90% of Dynasty leagues out there, but not exactly 100%. So double check your waiver wires and immediately add these guys if they are available. All right, as if the Niners running back injuries weren't bad enough already, now we might have to add Isaac Guerendo to the list depending on the severity of his foot injury at the end of this week's game. Now, I am recording this on Sunday night right after the Niners game, so hopefully you have more information about Guerendo by the time you're watching this, but if Guerendo misses games, then Patrick Taylor is presumably the next man up after taking over for Guerendo during the game and rushing for 25 yards and a touchdown on 7 carries. We've already seen how important handcuff running backs can be for fantasy football. This week specifically was a big week for backups, so adding Patrick Taylor should be a massive priority for all playoff teams right now. Or if you don't have a trade deadline, rebuilding teams could also benefit from adding Taylor and trading him to a contender for maybe a 3rd or 4th round rookie pick or more if possible. I will also mention that Keyshawn Vaughn and Israel Abanikanda may also be worth adding right now, as they would then be the backups to Taylor if Guerendo does actually miss games, and potentially they would be one injury away from a very valuable role as well. But speaking of backup running backs who did well this weekend, I highlighted Isaiah Davis in last week's video as a speculative add and potential stash for 2025, but this week, Davis is in here as a potential startable player based on his usage with Breece Hall inactive. There are also rumors swirling around that the Jets could shelf Breece Hall for the remainder of the year with this knee injury that he has, and if that happens, Isaiah Davis should remain in this RB1B role with Braylon Allen to close out the season, making him a very interesting flex option on a weekly basis. Plus, there's also the off chance that maybe Braylon Allen gets hurt and misses games, giving Isaiah Davis the entirety of the Jets backfield and a possible fantasy RB2 starter even during the playoffs. All right, time to get serious here. If you want an absolute Hail Mary, deepest possible pull of all time, you could potentially add Mike Boone this week. Mike Boone. Why? Because the Carolina Panthers lost both Jonathan Brooks and Raheem Blackshear this week for probably the remainder of the season based on the severity of their injuries when they happened. And right now, the only other running back the Panthers have on their roster besides Chuba Hubbard is Mike Boone on the practice squad. I had to actually look it up to see who else the Panthers have, and it's Mike Boone on their practice squad. And yes, it is that Mike Boone that some of you may have added and actually played back in 2019 during championship week when he was the starting running back for the Minnesota Vikings after both Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison got hurt. Of course, he didn't do anything as a starter that week during championship week. He rushed for 28 yards, scored 4.3 fantasy points, and of course, in week 17, the week that nobody cares about before it was an 18-week season, he rushed for 150 yards and a touchdown. I am definitely not salty because I definitely did not play Mike Boone in championship week and lose that one specific matchup. That is definitely not something that I did.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again.
So anyway, as it stands right now, it seems like Mike Boone could be the handcuff to Chuba Hubbard to end the year, or maybe they sign a free agent running back off the couch, and then whoever that is could be your waiver add this week. Now moving on to wide receiver, there are a pair of wide receivers to add in Pittsburgh based on the hamstring injury to George Pickens that kept him out of this week's action and potentially might keep him out of more games. Van Jefferson only had one target this week, but it was for a 10-yard touchdown, and he also had a 43-yard catch last week and a 35-yard catch the week before. He is absolutely a gamble if you throw him in your lineup, but a gamble that could potentially pay off if Pickens continues to miss games. Then the other ad is Calvin Austin, Austin, who is actually tied for second on the team in targets this week with 4, but only hauled in 1 catch for 4 yards, and that was it this week. But also remember that Calvin Austin did catch a touchdown in each of the past 2 games coming into this week, and has scored in 3 of his last 6 games, topping double-digit fantasy points in all 3 of those weeks he's found the end zone. He is absolutely a better play in your starting lineup than Van Jefferson, but that is also why he's way less available on waivers. So it's really dependent on your league. I would pick up Van Jefferson if he is still available, but I would definitely pick up and prioritize Calvin Austin if he is actually available in your league. And finally, we have Giants tight end Daniel Bellinger, who had a solid fantasy week this week with 5 receptions for 45 yards, 9.5 PPR fantasy points. The Giants did throw the ball nearly 50 times this week, and Theo Johnson is now on IR and done for the year, both of which probably led to the increased raw total target for Bellinger. But this Giants team is also very bad. Drew Lock is not afraid to sling it, and they get matchups against the Baltimore Ravens, Atlanta Falcons, and Indianapolis Colts, all of which could result in a continued high-volume passing offense to just try and compete and potentially win games and save Brian Dable's job. And they are also very bad passing defenses. So with Bellinger now the lone tight end 1 in New York, he might not be a horrible start for playoff teams that are still desperate for a tight end if you had Dalton Kincaid inactive for the past 3 weeks, or you've been making do with Mike Gesicki or Dalton Schultz or somebody like that, or maybe you just lost Taysom Hill for the rest of the year. Bellinger is certainly not ideal, but he may also not kill you either if you actually start him in your lineup.